Hello, welcome to the DVB newsroom. I'm Bureau Chief Myat. In our newsroom today, Bertil Lintner, author of Aung San Suu Kyi and Burma's Unfinished Renaissance in 1991, and Wendy Law-Yone, the author of Aung San Suu Kyi, Politician, Prisoner, Parent, which is recently released. So we are very honored to have you both here, Sia Bertil and Siama Wendy. Thanks for joining our DVB newsroom today.
Thank you very much. I apologize for the sound of the bells. I'm sitting under a church in front, and there's nothing I can do about it.
And I got a dog barking somewhere in the distance, and I can't get the dog to keep quiet either.
So we all have our disturbances. Sorry.
It's understandable. It is. You're not in the studio room like me, so it's understandable. Thank you for joining us today. I would like to first start with Bertil. As you've been writing many books about Burma, I wonder, how do you see Burma's political landscape today?
Well, this is extremely difficult to say. I mean, it's a very broad question. There's many things happening in different parts of the country. But by and large, I think we could say that the situation has not been worse than it is now for many, many years. Now we have an insurgency erupting in the center, in the Myanmar heartland, as well as in the frontier areas. And then we've got an extremely repressive military regime, which is up to all sorts of tricks all the time. I think there's very little room for optimism, I'm afraid.
Hi, Wendy. How do you see Myanmar political landscape today? I would like to know your thought on that as well.
I tend to agree with almost everything that Bertil thinks and have done for a long time. So it's not going to be the kind of discussion where we get into fisticuffs. But I'd like to sort of look at things that are happening and maybe interpret them in a slightly different way. For example, the idea that we're looking at the same kind of landscape we did even in 1989 and 1990, during the previous upheaval that has most parallels to this one. I think things have changed considerably due to all kinds of different factors. But in terms of seeing hope, certainly in the near term, I'm completely in agreement with Bertil. And it's a very difficult thing to say because there are so many people now who are, especially young people, who are throwing themselves wholeheartedly into trying to change the political scene. And it's very demoralizing to say that there's no hope. But I don't see how you can be clear-eyed and say that there is a hopeful outcome for Myanmar.
If we look back the previous 30 years, actually, we also have a kind of political deadlock for 3 decades. Very similar or different situation, let me say that, because to be exact, previous 3 decades, mean from 1988 to 2010, we've been under particular political leader and under the revolution of the spirit, what she said, and the nonviolence revolution. Myanmar people just keeping on for 3 decades. So how do you see that? I mean, the revolution landscape has been already changed. We are still going on with that nonviolence revolution, or we have the new generation has changed something from the nonviolence revolution to somehow another new revolution scenario. How do you think?
I think, yes, there are some fundamental differences between 1988, 89, 90, and the situation today. And you know how all these very optimistic foreign pundits was talking about this great transition to democracy after the 2010 election. I always argue there's not a transition because the military is still there. The 2008 constitution guarantees their absolute power in an emergency and even in normal circumstances. But what did happen during that decade of openness was a transformation of Burmese society. You had a whole generation of young people who got used to using the internet, who took part in discussions, they joined NGOs, they became journalists. I mean, that was unheard of before. And when I was there teaching at the Yangon Journalism School for many years, I was so amazed to see how creative and engaged these young people were. It was really impressive. That has changed. You can see today also how things are, news, talking from that point of view, is reaching the outside world in no time at all, thanks to the internet. And these kids are really smart. They know how to circumvent all sorts of restrictions and that sort of thing. And in 88, 89, there was first of all extremely little footage of what did happen, the massacres in Rangoon at that time. Alain Levoire took the most dramatic pictures of the crackdown. He had to hide his film rolls, there were film rolls in those days, in his underpants, and then fly to Bangkok and have them developed several days later. Now, within seconds, everything is out on the internet. But it's an advantage, but it's also a disadvantage because there's so much disinformation, misinformation on the net. It's very difficult to sort facts from fiction. But by and large, I can say that I'm very impressed with this new generation of young Burmese of various nationalities who have come to this kind of political maturity during the decade of openness. That is a fundamental difference. But if they're really going to overthrow the system, that's another matter.
Thank you, Bertil. How's your idea on that, Wendy? Because many people think that this is totally, different from the revolution from previous decades. This revolution is led totally by young generation.
That is true. And if you look at the ethnic armed groups, what I want to call them, EAOs, ethnic armed, well, the ethnic rebels, let's put it that way, if they don't like that term. If you look at the new armies that emerged, the Arakan Army and the Ta'ang, National Liberation Army, they're led by fairly young people. They're much younger than these old guys who have been in the jungle for decades. And I met representatives of both these new armies, and they emerged over the past few years from nothing to several thousand. They're far more dynamic. I'm not saying that I agree with them or disagree with them. That's beside the point. But they're far more dynamic. They have a vision for the future. They seem to know what they want. It's not just a question of surviving up in the mountains and in the jungles for decades, which many of the old leaders or the old groups, so to speak, are the main, what they're doing, really. So yes, there are differences, but we come back to this fundamental question. Are they really going to be able to overthrow the military dictatorship? This is a war that no side can win, really. The military is not strong enough. They're split up on too many different fronts to suppress all these rebellions across the country. But they have firepower. Not only firepower, they have air power. And there's a very big difference from what the situation was like in the 80s, for instance, when I was up in northern Myanmar. At that time, there was no air power. There were no helicopter gunships. There was nothing like that. Then you got on the other side, the resistance forces, if you may call them that. There are many, but are they really coordinated? I can't see any common strategy. The attacks here and attacks there and bomb here and bomb there, assassination here and another assassination there. But is there really any strategy how to counter the might of the Myanmar military? I fail to see any such strategy, and it's a sort of coordinated effort and a central command for this struggle. And that is a major weakness. But on the other hand, I don't think they're going to be defeated either. They're just going to be going like this for, the foreseeable future, unfortunately.
As you said, Wendy, you agree with what Bertil said. This revolution after 2021 coup is led by young generation. And do you think non-violence revolution led by Aung San Suu Kyi is over?
I think you first have to take a look at this catchphrase that has fueled the, her movement for so long, this idea of a revolution of the spirit. And I must admit, I have never actually been able to penetrate the idea behind that. I don't really know what a revolution of the spirit means. As I guess I understand it, it is a kind of a constellation of ideas and policies to be put into revolutionary action. But that's what all revolution is. But I think the profound change that has taken place is that for so long, Aung San Suu Kyi's ideas, they were not very revolutionary. What she was calling for were dialogue through peaceful means and civil disobedience and nonviolence. And all of these ideas, I feel, nonviolence as a political or even spiritual formula for change, I think is an idea that is increasingly outmoded, not just in Myanmar, but violence is the hallmark of just about every conflict and power struggle taking place all over the world today. And in Myanmar, the reigning order of the day is violent struggle, is armed struggle. I think as a kind of a clarion call, it doesn't have any meaning anymore for this new generation of resistors. In fact, very soon after the coup, very in early days, I remember seeing posts from these young Gen Z resistors who've now, of course, many of them have joined the PDFs in the border regions and so on. They've turned their back on these ideas of nonviolence and civil disobedience in a very purposeful way. And they said from the early days, that's over for us. We want a completely different model. This, I believe, is a profound change. The result is that this proliferation of armed groups engaged in fighting the junta since the coup, there are almost too many to keep track of. And I think a hidden history of Myanmar can be read in just the number of acronyms there is. Bertil has written a piece recently in the Irrawaddy. I think he was chronicling, tell me if I'm wrong, Bertil, but he was chronicling the peace effort, the so-called peace effort in Myanmar to resolve these conflicts. But it's one of the hallmarks of Burmese politics that there are these endless acronyms which reflect the fractured nature of resistance. And I think that also leads one to a kind of pessimism about how this is going to actually end. There's a lack of a visible leader or successor to Aung San Suu Kyi, say, but how do you ever bring together all of these forces? One benign way of looking at it is to think about it as a kind of an impetus toward federal government. But there's quite a big difference between federalism and just a complete, splintered armed groups. So I think that things like the revolution of the spirit, many of Aung San Suu Kyi's core principles, I don't think are going to have much traction anymore for a while. It's just because the world has changed and not only because the nature of struggle in Myanmar has changed. I think not only that dictum, but many of Aung San Suu Kyi's pronouncements about what is the essence of the Myanmar's dilemma, they have to be looked at again, and it's not so fashionable. People are not thinking about it. But for example, the great dictum that she lived by, and that seemed to resonate so much with people was something like what she said on fear, and fear is a habit, and we have to be free from fear. And looking back now, and even now, I'm wondering what kind of meaning people took from that, because I believe just the opposite. I believe fear is necessary when you're living under authoritarian regimes. Again, I'm probably misreading more complicated, philosophical concepts, but I think the wrong sort of messages have been given to people. I feel that fear is, that trying to deny fear is an anesthetic. Things like fear is a habit and we must escape from fear. All these core concepts are now, they don't have the same resonance that they once did.
Thank you, Wendy. I think I somehow agree with both of you, because you said, even though you are a little different in your opinion, but I understand that revolution setting in Myanmar changed after the 2021 coup, and we cannot deny that. And some people said that the recent revolution is a kind of leaderless revolution. But some people said this is a revolution led by the young generation. So, but I think, in my opinion, this is a kind of hybrid revolution. And I see the combination of non-violence revolution is still going on inside the country in different ways, like boycotting the regime in their own way, people from inside. Also, the government official, they're also trying in different ways to show their boycott to the regime, and they're not cooperating with the government or the military government. So, and also at the same time, we can see arms revolution outside of the country. They are just forming that kind of armed groups and trying to fight back against the regime. And you know, this is I see the revolution is kind of hybrid revolution state going on. But the thing is, I also wonder, is there any role of Aung San Suu Kyi in this kind of hybrid revolution? And do you see any role of Aung San Suu Kyi, Bertil?
We saw what happened immediately after the coup, the most recent coup. There was like a carnival, you know. People were out there, you know, dressed up as ghosts and sort of wizards casting spells on the generals. There was a protest where they put onions in the street and that sort of thing. And everything looks quite fun, actually. But then came the response, bullets. And that's been the military response every time there's been civil unrest. From 1962, the first massacre at Rangoon University, until now. I admire the bravery of all these young people who went out in the streets at that time. But I remember looking at that footage and I shook my head and said, please, please, this is going to turn very bloody. And of course it did. So, I mean, can you really launch a non-violent campaign struggle against the military, expect them to collapse? No, that's not going to happen, period. So how is change then going to come to Myanmar? Nothing is really going to change unless something happens within the military. As long as they remain united, then nothing is going to change. But let's say that there is a serious crack in the military, then we're going to see an extremely bloody civil war. The factions of the military are going to fight each other. I mean, unless and until that happens, I don't think the present kind of stalemate is going to be, you know, broken in the way. So, I mean, that's why I think it's very important to look at the possible scenarios for the next few years. What is going to happen? What is likely to happen, and what is not going to happen? That is something which, a question I cannot answer. If I had an answer to that, I mean, then I would be solving all the problems in Myanmar, and I can't. But it's issues which we would have to discuss among, you know, serious people and so on, and get rid of all this nonsense about transitions and democracy, democratic this and that. It's not going to happen like that. And then, of course, you have outside factors too, like China. Myanmar is of utmost geostrategic importance to China. China is, you know, it's a huge inland empire. And the only convenient outlet to the Indian Ocean for trade, for all sort of things, is Myanmar. Well, the only three countries which border China, which have access to the Indian Ocean: Pakistan, India, Myanmar. Forget about India, they're not going to allow any kind of transit trade there or anything. Pakistan is just too messy, even messier than Myanmar, but in a different way. And the only highway there is the Karakoram Highway, the most dangerous highway in the world. And it's too far west in China anyway. So for years, I mean, I wrote about this back in the early 90s, how China was going to open an outlet from Myanmar to the Indian Ocean. People laughed at me at that time and said, you must be crazy. But I wasn't crazy. I was just looking at what was happening. And it was obvious that that is what China was doing. Therefore, I think China will be willing to accept anyone who is in power in Myanmar as long as they're going to have close relations with that government. They had pretty good relations with Aung San Suu Kyi too after a while. They have now good relations with the military. Then for the Chinese, it's not about ideology. It's about geopolitical control. And that is an important factor that I think the resistance must study carefully too. Because China is going to react to any kind of change, small or big, that happens inside Myanmar, on the battlefield and in the cities.
Thank you, Bertil.
But peaceful resistance, sorry, no, not anymore. We're way past that stage.
It's the scale of the violence inflicted by the military on the early non-violent movement, you know, after the coup, that has bred this new kind of proliferation of violent struggle. So it's a self-perpetuating thing, and it's so impossible, as Bertil has said, to imagine a kind of return to those core ideals that will bring about the messages that the great proponents of nonviolence have advocated. And the messages, a message, great leaders have always had messages that were very much of the moment. Gandhi's such a message, Martin Luther King's, dream, Václav Havel's, message, they were all, Nelson Mandela's, they were all of the moment. And I'm not sure that nonviolence has the same kind of resonance anymore. But you asked about Aung San Suu Kyi's continuing role, and I think that recent history has shown is that she enjoys a kind of durability, a kind of in the popular imagination in Myanmar that is it's difficult to pin on just political success or anything. She inhabits a role. In the most basic terms, it has to do with people referring to her as Aung San Suu. Now, I know Aung San Suu is a title that is, or an honorific granted to many women of stature when they reach a certain age. Ludu Doama, for example, she was also, regarded as Aung. But Aung San Suu Kyi's, the Aung accorded to her, I believe, is of a different quality, because when I first heard the call is Aung San Suu, when she was campaigning for the 2015 elections, it was a real war cry. From there, it has morphed slowly into this almost a spiritual, mystical idea of somebody who's going to protect the country, the only person protect them from the Pagi and Sita, which is the father military. I think she enjoys and will continue to enjoy a role, even though it's not an idea that people might want to go, to get behind on the political scene. She still controls, the popular psyche in a way that I think, of course, it's clear now that even the junta realizes, because even now there are rumors, and yet unconfirmed, about how they are trying to get her to meet with foreign dignitaries, the Chinese envoy, the Thai foreign minister, because they acknowledge, she does play a role in the public consciousness. So she may, whatever happens to her, she's now Aung San Suu. She's clearly the matriarch of Myanmar. And I think there's still a very, very big resistance against saying anything against that orthodoxy. People are still reluctant to speak out against her because she is something greater than just a political leader. That, I think, is the role that she has continued to inhabit.
Thank you, Wendy. I agree with you. We can see now the regime is trying to use her as a bargaining chip for their own benefit, their legitimacy. So you mean that there's a way her motherly figure can do a greater good for the country? That is what you believe, as far as I understand. So for the last question to end this talk, I'd like to ask you one question, ask you both. Do you think armed revolution a solution to Myanmar political deadlock? Because you see young people choose waging war against the junta as a better alternative than a negotiated agreement. So do you think that, that this is a solution to Myanmar political deadlock? Or what would be a better alternative you can think of for Myanmar today?
A negotiated agreement means that two sides have to talk to each other and negotiate, right? No. That's never happened. It's never going to happen. It's a one-hand clapping all the time. The military is doing something. They're very good at throwing out these devices, to confuse people and give people hope that, oh, no, that is a step in the right direction. Something is happening. But then when the smoke is cleared, it's always business as usual. So I don't believe in any negotiated solution, because who are you going to talk to, and who are the military going to talk to? There's so many actors here. History has shown us that negotiations have never been the way forward. I just written another report about Myanmar's failed peace efforts in Myanmar, peace talks, since independence. And they've all been the same. The military has asked for surrender. And if you don't want to surrender, you can keep your guns, become businessmen or businesswomen, and engage in a kind of business. But don't oppose us. Since Taking Kodamang's early efforts immediately after independence till now has been exactly what the military mindset has been. So forget about the negotiated settlement. But then comes the other thing, armed revolution, as you what you call it, armed resistance or whatever. Well, in order for them to succeed militarily, they need better coordination, more weapons, and they haven't got that. I can't really see any way forward here. I can only see an ongoing stalemate for many years to come, unfortunately. I wish I could say something different, but I have to be honest to you and to myself and say that the situation is really bad. And I think it's more depressing now than it's been for many, many years, or decades, really. Because the brutality of the military this time is just unprecedented. The way they bombed and burned villages, because they got this new weapon, air power, which they're using extensively because the infantry has not been doing very well. If Burma ever changes, it will be through violence, unfortunately. I cannot see any other solution. But what form and shape that violence is going to take is another matter. Will it be a split in the military? Will it be defections to the opposition? Will it be something like that? It's hard to say. Burma is not going to change through negotiations and dialogues. No, that's not the question. We're way past that stage.
To answer the same question, I think that's what makes the situation so bleak. To think of any kind of resolution through dialogue, as Bertil's pointed out, with the military is just, it's a fool's errand. It's impossible to imagine. So what is the alternative? The alternative is armed struggle. Again, as Bertil has pointed out, the armed struggle doesn't look very promising for success because of the inequality in military power and firepower and so on. And you have to add to that this one other alternative that people often look toward, which is foreign intervention. And that is as unlikely for all kinds of reasons, especially now with the example of Ukraine. If Ukraine can't get its prestige and its the sympathy that is evoked in the world, if foreign intervention hasn't even worked in Ukraine, how is it ever going to come to Myanmar? So you can't count on foreign intervention, you can't count on armed struggle, you can't count on peaceful dialogue. What is the solution? And I think just looking ahead, I think perhaps we just have to wait for people to die off. A generation of military leaders perhaps to die off, with luck to kill each other in some way, but that's too convenient. And maybe for a new kind of, people talk about a grassroots revolution, which is happening. And maybe is going to be a new form of a guerrilla resistance or grassroots movement that will very, very gradually kind of spread to some kind of lasting change. For example, there was a story in today's papers about the how more and more regions that are free of temporarily free of military control, are setting up real governments now in their own areas. And these little mini fiefdoms or kings, it's an anarchic landscape, but it's certainly one that we could see as a change. And the fourth, of course, alternative would be a zombie apocalypse.
Thank you so much for both, sharing your very valuable time with us, our DVB newsroom, and for such an important topic. And I hope there will be some lights of local peace initiative. They don't want to accept any more fighting or any more war in their region, and then their own local peace initiative will start, and that was spread across the country. That's what we hope, and we never lose that hope.
I certainly share your hope.
Let's hope for the best, Bertil and Wendy, and that we prepare for the wars as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bertil.
Thank you, Wendy.